What's up, everyone? I'm going to tie a version of the American Coachman that I've been using as a dropper behind a beach popper type of surface fly to catch Sea-Run Cutthroat on saltwater beaches. Now, it's not actually known who first tied this pattern, but the late fly fisherman, writer and jazz guitarist Jim Kilburn found it in a sporting goods store on Vancouver Island in the 50s, where it was labelled as a California Coachman, even though it was nothing at all like a California Coachman. So Kilburn ended up renaming it the American Coachman, and later on he wrote that it was his first choice for sea runs from the beach. Now, I've been following the style which is depicted in Art Lindgren's superb book Fly Patterns of British Columbia, which I can thoroughly recommend as a great read. Now, as it's illustrated here, it's notable for having a red quill tail and a flat silver rib over a slender yellow wool body. But there are other versions. For instance, in Les Johnson's How to Fish for Sea-Run Cutthroat Trout, it appears with a tail of red calf or bucktail, no rib, and a tapered wool body. Richard Stoll, in his Sea-Run Cutthroat Trout, doesn't mention the pattern, but he shows it in a plate of classic flies, just the exact same configuration as the Les Johnson book. And that same pattern with no rib and a heavy tapered body makes an appearance in Les Johnson's much more recent Fly Fishing Coastal Cutthroat Trout, where he has it listed as a freshwater fly. So I guess the one I'm tying here is not the most common version, but I'm finding it gets the attention of the fish, and so I'm sticking with it. So the recipe calls for a 3x long hook in size 6 through 10. I'm using this Mustard R73 in size 6, which is 2x heavy and has got a matte gunmetal finish. Really, any saltwater resistant 3x long hook would work, but I do like the downturned eye because it gives it that classic look. I'm using a yellow 70 denier thread because I don't want it to show through the yellow wool body, and I'll finish the head with a 140 denier black thread. That's just my preference, and there'd be no problem if you just wanted to use the black thread for the whole fly. So I'll start my thread behind the eye and create a thread base which is going to end up level with where the barb would be. Snip that away. Now, as we've seen, the fly can be tied with a tail of red bucktail or calf tail, but I just like the effect you get from using a quill. And the fly pictured in the book uses a slender strip of red dyed swan. Now, obviously that's not an option for me, so I'm using goose, specifically goose shoulder. Now, these have got a curve to them, so if I used a single strip it would bend to one side or the other. So I'm using paired slips taken from, this is the left shoulder, and this is the right. So I'm going to match up the ends with the concave sides facing together. And I'm looking for a length which is going to be equal to the hook shank. About there. So I'll use a couple of pinch wraps to secure those in place. That looks okay. And then I'm going to advance my thread forward to just roughly lash those feathers down. All this is going to be covered with wool. I'll cut that excess away. And then tidy up a bit. Now, on my way back down, I'm going to tie in my rib, which is medium-sized gold and silver mylar tinsel. I want the silver side to show. So when I tie it in on my side, I'm going to have the gold side facing towards me. Just fix my tail a little bit. And then I'll clip that out of the way. Now we need a body of lemon yellow wool, and I want to talk about that. So I went into 3 different local yarn shops and asked for bright yellow wool. Oh no, they said, we can't get bright yellows, just not in fashion. So they had lame colours like custard and key lime and creme brulee. But what we want is shades like police line do not cross, or French classic mustard, or wasp ass. So, luckily I have a good friend Jen who knits, and she found me a yard or 2 of lemon yellow wool, and so all is good. If you looked in the fly box of a Washington cutthroat fisherman 1 or 2 generations ago, you'd see many more yellow flies than you'd found nowadays. We use predominantly pink, chartreuse, olive, but back in the day yellow was predominant. So this here is a 4-strand worsted weight yarn, and I'm using all 4 strands. It's really compressible and easy to use. Now I don't want to create a step where I've tied it in, so I'm securing it the full length of the body. And I'll trim it with an angled cut so that it tapers down towards the eye. So I'm going to wind my yarn on evenly, as I don't want to produce a tapered body. You can adjust the bulk just by the amount of tension you wind with. And I'm going to try not to get an abrupt edge in front, because that would force my wing up at an angle. So I'm just looking to create a smooth platform here. Okay, there we go. So I'll wind on my tinsel using pretty open turns. I can usually get 3 turns as specified in the pattern. And here I've got 4 turns. I'm not going to worry too much about that. This is a fishing fly, and I just don't think they'll care. Fold back my tinsel. And that's my rib squared away. So I'll just consolidate that head area. Now I've got white bucktail for my wing. Evidently the original was tied with polar bear, and I'm sure that most BC anglers would still be using that. And I'm not going to go into that whole issue. Suffice to say, I'm quite happy to use bucktail. So I've got a sparse clump that I'm going to clean up, get rid of the short hairs and the crap. And that's going to leave me with about 20 or so hairs, I'm guessing. And I'm going to measure my wing so that it extends about halfway into the tail. So I'll cut that to length and then attach it with a few pinch wraps and then wrap into the cut ends. There we go. I'm happy with that. So at this point I'm going to attach my black thread, making a jam knot right behind the eye. and then tying over the yellow thread. And then I can cut away both the yellow thread and the black waste piece. I've got some pale brown hen saddle for my hackle. There's not many good ones left on this patch, but that there is a good enough looking feather. I'll strip off the fluff. Now, normally I would tie this in by the tip, but looking at the feather, the better longer fibers are down at the base. So in this case, I think I'll tie it in by the stem. And this is unfortunately a pretty thick stem. Okay, that's the stem gone without too much problem. Now I'll use my hackle plier, basically so you can see what I'm doing. Just keep those fibers going back. And I think this is a dense feather, so I think 3 turns are going to be enough. I'll make a little space so that I can tie it off. And you can see I've got a few fibers going forward, which I'll deal with in just a minute. First of all, I'll just trim off that hackle tip. Now I'm just going to try and sweep back all those errant fibers so that I can cover them up with my thread. There we go, that's sorted. Now I'll just wind back very slightly on the hackle to encourage it to lay back a bit. That looks okay to me for a fishing fly. Whip finish. Now I've managed to trap a fibre under my thread, but I should be able to remove that. There we go. So that's your American Coachman, British Columbia style. I'm going to finish it with a little bit of UV resin, just thin UV resin on the head. Well, thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit the subscribe button and give it a like. So until next time, take care and tight lines.